meeting...
We'll just wait confirmation of that, Chairman.
Oh, right. They let me know, do they?
They should let us know, yeah.
The webcasting team there.
Okay, we're now live, Chairman.
It's now live. Okay, well, welcome to this meeting of the Culture and Communities Select Committee. And it's being held remotely, and members are in attendance via video conferencing. The meeting is being live streamed and will also be available for repeated viewing. I'll begin by naming the members who are in attendance for the public record and asking members to confirm their attendance. During the meeting, if a member wishes to speak, they will indicate this to me and I will call them to speak in turn. I would like to remind members of the County Council standing orders continue to apply to please keep your microphone muted unless you've been called to speak, and that you may be visible on the screen to the public and to other members even when you're not speaking. I'll now call those members in attendance. Members, please unmute and confirm your attendance for the record and to ensure that you can be heard. Councillor Christopher Carter.
Confirmed I'm present, Chairman.
Councillor John Bennison.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Fred Burkitt. Councillor Jackie Branson.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Anne Briggs.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Zilia Brooks.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Peter Chegwin.
Present, Chairman.
Yeah. Councillor Daniel Clark.
Sends his apologies.
Right. Will you note that? Yeah. Councillor Rod Cooper.
Yes, good morning, present, Chairman.
Councillor Pal Hare.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Dominic Hiscock.
Good morning, I'm present, Chairman.
Good. Councillor Rob McCarter.
Yeah, good morning, I'm present, Chairman.
Councillor Michael White. So we've got a few who aren't in yet. We'll now move into the agenda. First of all, apologies for absence. I think someone just mentioned. Do we have any other apologies?
No other apologies that I'm aware of, Chairman. I've noted Councillor Clark's apologies.
Right. Then the usual declarations of interest. So if you have a disclosable pecuniary interest or a personal interest in any agenda item, please do declare this now or at the time of the item by indicating that you wish to speak. First of all, is the confirmation of the minutes. Let's get them up on my... Trying to work minutes. Okay. Does anyone to page 1, page 2, page 3? Is this the right one? I've got the wrong. I'm trying to work two computers at the same time. Not page 2. So it starts on page 3. Page 4, page 5, page 6. Is everyone happy to agree those?
Yes, Chairman. Yes, content.
Thank you.
Confirmed, Chairman.
Have we had any are there any deputations?
No, Chairman, no deputation requests.
Right, so now you've got my announcements. First of all, the library transformation. The staff consultation phase of the library service transformation is now complete, and I'm pleased to confirm that all the necessary staff savings have been achieved through the ending of fixed term contracts and the take-up of voluntary redundancies, meaning that no compulsory redundancies have been required. Blackfield, Elson, Fair Oak, Horndean, Lea on the Solent, Lyndhurst, Odium and Southam libraries have all now closed. With the exception of Blackfield, negotiations are well underway with each community with regards to the transition to independent community libraries. Grant applications for 5 of these independent libraries will be considered by the executive member this month, with the applications for the remaining 2 anticipated for consideration in March. The library service has been awarded $34,000 to act as a census support service, providing support to help residents to complete their census online. This service will be operated from a number of libraries within Hampshire and aligns with its strategic objective to support people to access digital services. In December, the library service submitted an expression of interest to take part in the Reading Agency's Reading Friends scheme. And this scheme has been developed as part of the government's £7.5 million funding to tackle loneliness this winter, and is aimed at bringing people together to read, chat and share stories. Building on the success of the hundreds of phone calls that the library service has made in the last year to customers of the home library service, this scheme will use volunteers to keep in touch with isolated or lonely residents. Now, I did have something else to report on the library service in 2019-20, which is obviously this time last year. And I'll run through it very quickly because it's really very good news. Hampshire became the most visited library service in the UK, with physical visits increasing from 4.68 million in 2018-19 to 4.74 million in 2019-20, now the highest of any of the 153 local authorities in England, Wales or Scotland that submitted figures. Also, 4.9 million physical books were issued, the highest again of any of the 159 local authorities who submitted figures. And just under 300,000 e-books were issued, and that's the highest of any of the 159 authorities, again, in England, Wales or Scotland that submitted figures. And just under 1.3 million total stock of books were available for lending, again, the highest of any of the 157 authorities who submitted figures. And the service had the second highest income generated by any county authority in England. And all this has been achieved with expenditure remaining referred to as mid-low table compared to other county authorities. I must remind you that this actually is 2019-20 and we're now into 2021, but it's still very impressive. Next, I wanted to report on the registration service. And this has been at the forefront of the response to the pandemic throughout the last 11 months. During the first lockdown, all services, apart from death registrations, were suspended. Staff remained office-based as they were able to register deaths by phone for the first time in history. During this period, staff received many unsolicited compliments from the public, such as the one I will read out. I wish to express my sincere thanks to all the registration officers for all their care and patience in handling the registration of my mother's death. This was not straightforward, as 2 successive medical certifications had inaccurately recorded her cause of death, and the coroner became involved. At all times, your colleagues, registrars and receptionists have been unfailingly kind and patient. This could have been distressing as well as frustrating for the family, but the process has been as painless as possible in the circumstances. The service and support provided to me and our family has been professional and efficient as you might hope. But it was more than that too, characterised by kindness, humanity and outstanding public service. My best wishes to you all at this challenging time. ceremony happening. Okay. During this period, marriages and civil partnerships were suspended by the government, and hundreds of couples have contacted the service for help, support and reassurance during this uncertain time. I'm delighted to advise that beyond the exceptional performance of the team during the first phase of the pandemic, the backlog of 1,800 birth registrations and 400 citizenship ceremonies has now been largely addressed. The service offer has also been enhanced to include a digital citizenship ceremony, which has received a positive response from the public. It was reported in the press, I think, can't remember when, a few weeks ago, about a wedding that the registry service did 2 hours earlier than had been planned, or 2 hours later, or something. And anyhow, they enabled the marriage to happen, which otherwise wouldn't have done because of the imposition of the lockdown. Next, the countryside. And visits to countryside service sites and country parks have seen a significant increase this year, averaging 20% higher than last year, and over 50% increase in visits during lockdowns. As a result, the county parks are currently 15% up on parking income at this point in the year, despite being closed to cars for April and much of May last year, which is helping to minimise the losses in other parts of the service. A new COVID-secure approach to events has enabled several Christmas activities to be available to our visitors, including a Christmas trail at 3 country parks, which sold nearly 6,200 tickets, and a Santa experience event at Staunton Farm, which sold out by the beginning of December, with 365 children visiting over 5 days. And that's the end of my communications. And now we're on to the revenue budget report for the culture, communities and business services. So I shall hand over now.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah.
I have a presentation for you, which I will be loading up now. You do have this in your packs, but hopefully I'll be able to share this.
Yeah. It's item number 6.
I can't find it. Oh, here we go. Hopefully that's loading for you now. If you can confirm you can see it.
Yeah.
Excellent, that's good. Okay. So it's taking its time to move on. Apologies.
So,
there we go.
Sorry, it's Sue Lapham, is it talking?
It is me, yes, Sue Lapham.
Yeah.
I'm the finance business partner for the CCBS department, and I'll be presenting this presentation, which is linked to the main revenue budget report in your packs. Just maybe 2 or 3 points of clarification before I launch into the main presentation, which I thought might be helpful for everybody's understanding and maybe not as clear as they might be in the actual report. Firstly, this is a pretty low-key budget report, and for the absolute avoidance of doubt, there are no new savings proposals included in the budget for next year. I know there's been a lot of discussion recently about the need for a further savings programme to 2023. We are not considering that here at this point, so references to savings are just about the removal of the existing transformation to 2021 savings that were agreed a couple of years ago. Secondly, the report itself is largely silent on COVID-19. Cabinet has obviously been receiving regular updates and will have another one next month. But I thought it might be helpful just to confirm with you all that the budget for next year has been prepared on what seems like a surprising assumption, that assumption being that the financial impact will have largely ended by April 2021. Now, I know very few of us here today would really expect that to be the case, But in the absence of any clear, consistent alternative for the County Council, we felt it best to prepare the budget on that basis, with COVID impacts beyond April this year being reported as variances against that budget and dealt with on a corporate basis in the same way that COVID impacts this financial year have been done. So you won't see any major changes to budgets driven by the impacts of COVID. Finally, then, just to cover the point that CCBS as a department has a very diverse range of services, and in the past, its financial reporting has been quite complex. We have tried to streamline that this year, and the budgets are now reported across just 2 executive members. It was previously 4. So the executive member for Recreation, Heritage, Countryside and Rural Affairs, which covers the services within the remit of this select committee. And then separately, the services reported through to the executive member for Commercial Strategy, Human Resources and Performance, which will be reported to the Policy and Resources Select Committee. So at various points in the presentation and report, you'll see references to either the whole department or, in particular with the last couple of slides in this presentation, just those services within the remit of this committee. So hopefully that's helpful clarification before I start. So the presentation will largely cover the areas of the report. There's sections A to D in the report are corporate context, and then thereafter more of the CCBS services issues come forward. County Council context, I'll try and be brief. You will have seen this slide before, I know. This is a reminder, if one were needed, that we have been in a difficult financial position and making savings for well over a decade now, and a reference in the note at the bottom of the programme of savings to come, for which we have not yet developed proposals. This slide covers the medium-term financial strategy position, or MTFS, as it was at the time those 2021 savings were agreed and developed. Clearly, a lot has changed since 2019. And this next slide then just summarises some of the points in the main report on the position relating to COVID as it was reported to Cabinet back in November. And as I say, this is quite a sort of quickly developing area, and a further report will be going to Cabinet next month. But the final bullet point is the useful one to hold on to, that we were able to put in a response using our reserves. The government announced its spending review back in November. Again, we only have certainty for 1 year, understandable entirely in the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And then following on from the national spending review, our own Hampshire County Council financial settlement for next year came through on the 17th of December. Final figures will be confirmed either later this month or next month. And there's a number of issues which again are covered in more detail in the report. By and large, they were what we were expecting to see. In 1 or 2 cases, for example, that third bullet point there, they were perhaps more helpful than we were expecting. We are working through the implications of this settlement and obviously await the final confirmation, and no doubt the February Cabinet update will cover this in more detail. This next section then is not actually covered in the report, but it does relate quite closely to the response to the COVID financial impact and is often an area of interest. I won't go through this again in detail, but you will see from the slide that we had very healthy levels of reserves at the start of the financial year. And as we've reported previously, over half of those are already committed to existing spend programmes. You'll see also nearly 100 million, which is set aside across all departments to help with the delivery of future savings programmes and also to cash flow any late delivery of existing savings programmes. We also self-insure, as I'm sure many of you will be aware, and therefore we set aside funding in reserves to mitigate those risks. We also hold money on behalf of other organisations. At this point, I need to cover off some more three-letter acronyms. So the schools reserves are net of the dedicated schools grant deficit. The 5.1 million is held on behalf of the Enterprise M3 Local Enterprise Partnership, and the 22.3 million is in our general fund balance. But the final bullet point is the key one, that having these level of reserves has enabled us to develop a financial response package for COVID. This again is a slide you may remember from last year, updated figures of course. The budget bridging reserve has a balance at the start of the financial year, which we are expecting to reduce by about 44 million to balance off the position this year. That's linked to our plan and our strategy of leaving ourselves 2 years to deliver savings and using this reserve to cash flow the funding gap in the interim years. The other reserves, as the notes say, are earmarked for use in our COVID financial response package. Very quickly then, an update on the existing savings programme. Reminder there, no new savings as part of this budget setting process. Reminder here, again, this is a corporate report, that the pressures in social care mean that the transformation savings in those areas are going to need some of that cash flow funding. And then we finally get to the CCBS sections of the report. So a reminder for all of you that the existing savings target for the whole of CCBS 3.382 million. You'll see the services listed there. Those services within the remit of the Culture and Communities Select Committee, 2.932 million. I probably hardly need to remind you of some of the key issues from implementation of those savings, as the library proposals were clearly the most challenging and the ones with the most impact. And you'll remember very clearly, I'm sure, the extensive public consultation on the library proposals and the debate at this committee on those proposals. And we've just heard from the chairman how those proposals have been implemented. Despite COVID, I'm pleased to be able to tell you that the CCBS 2021 savings have all been achieved on time, and in fact some of them achieved early, which is a very good achievement. For CCBS then, key departmental issues and challenges covered in the report. Again, you would expect COVID to feature very high on that list, and of course it does. Income generation is always an issue for CCBS services because of the dependency on income to cover costs, and you'll see that in one of the slides that I'll be showing very shortly. CCBS services have worked very hard, as I know you're aware, and again the chairman's communications have just indicated how well that's been received from some members of the public. And so COVID and income generation are quite linked. And you'll see then the point that I mentioned earlier, that the budget has been prepared on the basis that all income will return to pre-COVID levels, but clearly considerable uncertainty around that. We're back into a period of lockdown, but the vaccine is being rolled out. We don't know how customers are going to respond. And of course, the wider economic situation may still come into play. A few key numbers again pulled from the report. The figures in bold are those relating to the services within the remit of this select committee, and the figures in italics are those for the whole CCBS department, including those services reported through to Councillor Reid and covered by the P&R Select Committee. Then just to finish, a couple of charts. This one, a pie chart looking at the Culture and Communities services. you'll see the library service, the blue segment, is still clearly the major budget area within these services. And finally, if we just look at the bar charts here to emphasize the point I made earlier about the importance of income generation to fund the costs of CCBS services, particularly the culture and communities services. If you just look at the left-hand bar chart, for example, you'll see that the employee costs alone are nearly £26.5 million, but the cash limit funding is only 22.3, with income and recharges making up the balance. So you can see that the income generation element remains critical for CCBS services to be able to thrive and flourish. So thank you, Chairman. That was the end of my slideshow. I'd be very happy to take any questions, or maybe if they're specific to CCBS, Felicity may wish to come in.
Thank you very much indeed, Sue. And are there any questions? Councillor Chegwin.
Thank you, Chairman. Two quick questions. Grateful for a very clear presentation. It was said there's no new savings, but the figures clearly show that the revised budget for 2020-2021 for culture and communities, 25.5 million, the proposed budget, 20.294 million. That shows that the expenditure on our services is proposed to be cut by around 20%. I don't know if the officer wishes to comment on that. A specific query about services and the effect of COVID on income and expenditure, and I'm thinking particularly of country parks. There must be some areas in which COVID has actually helped to increase our income. For example, car parking charges in country parks, as more people use them as a relatively safe and cheap form of exercise and recreation. But I wonder how that extra income is balanced against the loss from services, say the cafeterias in the country parks, which have remained closed for much of the past 10 months. I appreciate we probably can't have much in the way of detail today, but it would be helpful to either have a report circulated or for the next meeting, giving an up-to-date position of showing the variances against budget for where income has actually gone up, but also where income has gone down and how the two balance out. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Shall I come in first on that one then? In terms of the comparison between the revised and the forward budget, the revised budget actually includes a number of one-off additions, for example, where we're using cost of change to help support the delivery of a savings programme. So the revised budget includes one-off funding that would inevitably drop out because of its one-off nature. And if you look at paragraph 31 in the main report, you'll see the differences between the original and the revised, many of which are one-off rather than ongoing. So again, paragraph 40 in the report confirms that the full value of the savings, which is just the 3.382 million, is all that has been removed in terms of savings from the budget. I hope that's helpful. In terms of your points on COVID, I'm not too aware whether we've actually seen an increase in any of our income as a result of COVID. I think the net loss, excuse me, the net loss to CCBS services is about 16 million from COVID. But just a reminder, perhaps Felicity may want to come in on this one, but just a reminder that the COVID financial pressures are not an impact for the department, and that the County Council as a whole has developed a package of proposals to absorb the COVID losses. Obviously, that includes the government grant that we've been receiving as well. So those pressures are not reflected in the figures that you see in the report because they are being dealt with corporately this year. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
I'll just add to the country parks, and we've actually got Jo Heath here who'll be giving a presentation in a little while. She might just want to add a bit more detail to what I'm about to say. But Councillor Chegwin, you're right, we have seen an increase in the car parking income during the sort of the up periods, and where we haven't had to lock down the country parks in this current lockdown period or the last then. That has also seen an increase in income. So the country parks are largely balancing out now. We have still got our takeaway provision open in terms of our food, which is in line with government guidance. And yeah, that's obviously a very, very helpful position. We have managed to make up the losses that we suffered over the early period of the summer. But yes, Jo could say more if she wants to, but I think that's probably the outline of what you were looking for there.
Jo, do you want to come in?
Happy just to add a little bit more. We are up on car parking, it's around 15%, but members will be aware that the farms and Titchfield Haven, for example, have been closed a lot more than the parks. And we're very much, we're down on admissions and memberships and down on catering as well. So we were forecasting something in the region of the 2 million at the beginning of the sort of lockdown, and we're now at 1.3 million in terms of overspend. So we've made up some ground on car parking, which is great.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Benison.
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's just about the savings programme, and just to you said that we had completed the savings for the 2021. Were we behind on the previous year at all? Or was that completed successfully on time?
Shall I, if I start? Yep. The 2019 savings, the only outstanding item, which is referenced briefly in the report itself, was the office accommodation, where the savings were, or the ability to make savings is impacted by activities across the whole county council. And the Corporate Office Accommodation Board has been established, and we are now looking at a very modest balance of those savings that remains outstanding. And that will be dealt with through that corporate process. The departmental savings for the previous savings programme were fully delivered on time.
Thank you.
And you said, if I may, Chairman, you said that you'd got some of the savings brought forward earlier for this year. Do you expect to complete the rest of the savings on time?
Yes, that is the case. Despite everything that COVID has thrown at the department, that is what we expect.
Thank you very much, Sue. Does Felicity, do you want to add to that or not? No.
I think that's all it needs saying. Everything's completed, and the budget will be what it is in April.
Yeah. Any other questions? So we have a recommendation, which is that the Select Committee supports the recommendations being proposed to the Executive Member for Recreation, Heritage, Countryside and Rural Affairs. Are we all happy with that? Do we have to take a vote on it?
We do, Chairman. So what we'll do is we'll just launch an electronic poll, which members should be familiar with. It should pop up in the middle of your screens in a moment, members. If you could just cast your vote for, against or abstain in terms of supporting those recommendations being proposed to the Executive. I'll just wait for the votes to come in, Chairman, and I can announce the result to you.
Chairman, apologies, I can't see the form on my computer. Can it be recorded, please, Councillor Chegwin? I'm against the budget proposals. Thank you.
I've noted that, Councillor Chegwin.
Thank you.
I can't see it's still coming.
You might need to go to the meeting chat box, Chairman. That's where the vote will be if you can't see it in the middle of your screen.
No, I can't. Which is the meeting chat box? Oh, help.
I can see though, Chairman.
Yes, I've got it.
We have got 9 votes for and 2 votes against. So the committee has supported those recommendations being made to the executive member.
No, I've lost it. Oh, yeah. Okay. Now, next item, number 7, CCBS Climate Change and Natural Environment Workstream. And I think Jo Heath is going to present this item. Hello, Jo. Nice to see you.
Hello, thank you, Chairman. I will try and hopefully share my screen successfully. Moment. There we go. Hopefully you can all see that. Can you see that?
I can.
Good, thank you.
Yes, I've still got the form up, right, okay.
Thank you, and thank you, Chairman and members, for the opportunity to come and update you on the CCBS climate change programme. And more specifically, I'm going to focus on the natural environment work stream, which I am leading. A reminder then about the CCBS climate change programme. Our programme objectives are contributing to Hampshire County Council's net zero emissions by the year 2050, which is a target for the whole of the County Council. As part of this, we'll be adapting and building resilience to a potential 2 degrees centigrade rise in temperature and the impacts that that has. And what we're looking at is using our land and estate, and particularly held by CCBS, to sequester carbon and protect the natural environment. We will be considering ways in which we can be more climate friendly throughout all of our operations in CCBS. And what is really perhaps puts us in a slightly different position is that we are very much frontline services. So we are a shop window, if you like, for Hampshire County Council, which gives us an opportunity to educate and influence others to join us in helping to tackle climate change and the impacts of climate change. Just to briefly run through the climate change programme, there's a number of work streams. You'll probably not be surprised to see, and some of you may already be aware of this, but the first one, travel and transport, we are piloting hydrogenated vegetable oil as a low carbon alternative to diesel in the larger vehicles, and also we're piloting the use of electric and hybrid vehicles for our pool cars with Alpha City. And clearly reductions in journeys are being looked at as part of our delivery efficiencies programme as well. The energy and infrastructure work stream is considering renewable energies, and actually HCC has now transitioned to 100% of renewable energy across the corporate estate. Energy efficiency plans have already been part of the work that property services do with our estate, but we are able to increase that, particularly with a grant from government, which has recently been made available for us to look at window replacements and solar panels across the estate, which is it's probably been reported on a different way, but I just wanted to give you an update on that. And Colin Jackson is developing at the moment the State of the Estate report, which is looking at how we tackle Scope 1 emissions. Scope 1 emissions are those directly caused by our operations, as well as looking at Scope 3 emissions. Product life cycle is delivering primarily through county supplies and is looking at how we seek to reduce our Scope 3 emissions, that are those that are caused by our suppliers and the products that we buy, and also adopting some climate-related KPIs for existing suppliers. And then food, Well, we've been eliminating single-use plastics for some time now, trying to reduce that, and that's across our parks as well as all the work that HC3S do. And we're also trying to promote more of a move towards low carbon food, so reduction in meat eating, for example, by promoting less meat on our menus. I'm going to focus today on natural environment, so hopefully that just gave you a bit of a snapshot, if you like, of all the other work streams that are happening across CCBS. But today I'm just going to focus on the natural environment work. So there's a number of different themes to this, and the first one, and perhaps the most major one, is looking at our carbon storage and sequestration. So what we manage and own and manage quite a lot of green estate across CCBS, and what we're aiming to do is find out how much carbon is stored and sequestered annually through our land holdings. And this is a bit of a pilot approach, really, and it means that HCC are looking whether we can adopt this more corporately, but certainly we're focusing at the moment on the CCBS estate. So to do this, we need to identify and calculate our how much land we hold, what type of land it is, how we're using that land, and then look at some of the risks to carbon storage and sequestration. And then the third step is to develop a decision-making tool that helps us make decisions around the future management of our land and builds on the capacity that our land has in order to sequester carbon, and produce a strategy that outlines the actions that we're going to take to do that. And so in a bit more detail then, and sorry, I'm harking back to your days at school or college around how carbon is stored, but just a little reminder for us all that all, if you like, ecosystems and land provides a carbon sink of some sort or another. And this is where carbon can be removed from the atmosphere by natural processes. And there are a number of tools that we can use that help us calculate that, but we've decided to use the INVEST tool. And so we've done a bit of research on which tool is best to use, and the INVEST tool provides values for every type of land and what it's able to store or sequester in terms of carbon. It's useful to note, because I think it's sometimes forgotten in some ways, that the carbon stored in the soils is more than that stored by sequestering from the atmosphere. But, you know, I'm sure we've all heard of the value of peatlands in doing so, not that we have much in the way of peatlands as such in Hampshire. I thought this was a useful graph because it reminds us that actually, whilst there's an awful lot of discussion around trees, tree planting and woodland as part of our mitigation for climate change, that other habitats are very significant in terms of their ability to store carbon, and some of that's below the ground as opposed to, or in the soils as opposed to above ground. And this chart really sort of demonstrates that. We're quite lucky in Hampshire, we have quite a wide range of habitats, including some of the most important sort of lowland, well, not lowland bog, but wet heathland, which is important, and some remnants of lowland bog. So places like Castle Bottom or Short Heath, land that we own and manage as lowland heathland. Obviously, a fair bit of woodland as well. You can see one of our woodlands behind us. This is Ashford Hangers National Nature Reserve. But this is helpful to remind us that all of these ecosystems, these natural systems, do have act as a carbon pool. So I wanted to sort of run you through an example of how this works. This is River Hamble Country Park, and you can see the picture, the map on the, well, it may be different on my screen actually. On the left on my screen, so the different coloured ones, it may be on the right on yours. I think it's the other way around. So the green is the woodland essentially, and the pink and blue bits are variously grassland and farmland. And when you run the tool, what it does do is shows you the levels of different carbon sequestration and storage that is happening on that land. And practically every graph I put up today is a bit counterintuitive. This one is for me as well. So it's a heat map, but it's actually the other way around. So in other words, the redder it is, the less carbon it sequesters and stores. The lighter it is, the more it does. So the yellow is areas of higher carbon sequestration, which would make sense. It's woodland. But that's the type of output we can get from this using this tool. And so we have mapped our estate in terms of the type of habitats it is and the condition of those habitats. And we've run the tool, and it shows that we store around 272 tonnes of carbon per hectare, which is a total of 936,000 tonnes. And so that's the amount of carbon that we store, and then the amount that's removed every year. We're still working on those figures, but it's around 15,000 carbon dioxide, tons of carbon dioxide. The next step is to look at the our farm estate and how much that stores and sequesters. The Invest tool is quite a blunt instrument around that, and so we are looking at how we can provide a finer grain for that agricultural land. So in other words, within Invest, you might talk about arable land, but we know that we can get a finer grain around the type of arable land it is, and also how we manage that arable land. It gives us a bit more detail and information. And we're currently working on the mapping for that to give us a figure. And this is our sort of direction of travel, if you like. So we're currently working on that step one, which is the current carbon sequestration storage capacity of our existing land. We are identifying risks to that sequestration, and those include things like weather, pests and diseases, but I'll talk a bit more about that as well. So that, if you like, impacts on our ability of our estate to deliver. And then we're looking at how we change land use, land management, and the way that we manage the land has an impact on its ability to store. And then what we get to is what action can we take to actually drive up the potential. What's important to note is that the action that we take is likely to have additional benefits. So I will use woodland planting as an example. If we changed a field currently used as for farmland as arable land and put woodland on it and planted trees, then of course we would see an increase in sequestration and eventually in storage as well. But we would also have biodiversity enhancements, there would be air quality improvements, potentially nitrate mitigation, maybe even flood protection, depending on where it is. So these, whatever the driver is, the actions that we take will have other benefits as well that we need to note and be mindful of. The type of risks that we are currently facing, climate change in itself is a risk because we are seeing changes in summer and winter temperatures, changes in precipitation, and that has an impact on our habitats and the way that we manage them. So we talked about the fact that wet heathlands are very important. Well, if we have a lot of hot, dry summers, then not only do we have a reduction in the amount of water, so they become less wet and therefore they don't store so much carbon, but also we get things like increased fire risks, and that releases carbon. So you can see how there are changes in the way that we need to look at how we manage our habitats in order to try and mitigate some of those risks. Pests and diseases is an interesting one, and we are currently working on the ash dieback programme. We know that there will be around 8,000 mature trees in Hampshire affected by ash dieback, And this, again, the photo behind me, if you go and stand up here where I'm standing to take the photo, you'll see yourself how much ash has been affected here. And of course, the loss of those mature trees is very important. So there is going to be a short-term loss whilst we look at replacement and how we mitigate some of that in terms of our strategy. I won't go through them all, but you get the idea that there are things that are impacting upon our ability or the ability of our land to deliver. What we're then looking at is how do we increase our ability to sequester and store. And I think often we think about only the land use changes, so changing from one type of use to another, changing from arable to woodland. But actually, there are other factors we need to take into consideration. They may be things like adaptive management. So where we may, for example, and I've got some example to work through with you, but where you've got a farmland, you might leave a strip that is a wildlife strip, and that in itself will add some value, reduce emissions and add some value. So that's not about changing the whole land, but it's about adding elements, if you like, that benefit. Then you've got the way in which we do our activities and operations. So, for example, not cutting so frequently, so we leave grass longer, which I'm sure you've all heard about in terms of leaving areas for insects and invertebrates. Actually, again, has a positive impact. So changing the way we do things helps. And then clearly there's an ability to look at what land we actually own. And all of that leads to an asset strategy and a strategy that includes how do we maximise the benefits and the potential for our estate to help us in tackling climate change. Another fairly counterintuitive graph, apologies, but I have to think about it in the same way as finance, which, you know, it's a minus number. It means it's coming in. It's a good thing. And so here you've got a change from semi-natural grassland. So this is looking at semi-natural grassland. If you were going to change it into arable, for example, it would have a negative impact and actually would result in some emissions. Whereas if you restore it to, if you change it to wetland, it has a positive impact. If you restore it to semi-natural grassland over a period of time, then again it has a positive impact, or you maintain it as semi-natural grassland. This is a similar example for arable. So if you were changing arable to woodland or arable to a pollen and nectar mix, what would that look like in terms of its ability to sequester more carbon from the atmosphere? One of the other things that we're able to do with the tool is actually put in other criteria. So as I said, the benefits are beyond just carbon sequestration storage. And so there are other factors that we can actually plot what the benefits are that our land is delivering. And I was going to just take you through a bit of an example of that. It is for illustrative purposes only. But we're using an area at Titchfield. So, and as I say, it's illustrative, so it's not all 100% correct. It's just a way in which we can have the conversation. So this is, the current use of this land is arable with market garden growing root crops and other vegetables. And as you can see, it's in a coastal location. And using this tool, we can see how much carbon is stored, how much is emitted and how much is sequestered, and what the nitrogen loss is likely to be. And if you look at the sort of spider diagram at the bottom, you'll see what it delivers in terms of its land. So very high on food at this point, medium on environment setting, not much in the way of recreation and tourism. So if you then say, well, we're going to change the way that we manage this. So this is not about changing the whole land use, but rather adding some elements that are beneficial. So maintaining agricultural use for most of it, but fencing out a strip, creating some more access, stopping the use of bird scarers. So if you can see, there's a range of different measures we can put in place and how that impacts on the spider diagram in terms of what that land now delivers, and also in terms of what it emits or sequesters in terms of carbon and what the nitrogen loss is. And then the next option is if we convert it. So if we actually change the land use and we have instead coastal grazing here, it means that there's continuous vegetation. We're not ploughing the land up anymore, which it reduces our emissions and soil erosions. And again, you can see then the spider diagram changes again, and it's delivering a lot more in terms of the environment, recreation, but not so much, obviously, much lower in terms of food. So I just use those for illustrative purposes to show you how that decision-making tool can work for us. That then feeds into a strategy for our estate, which we need to make sure links to other plans and strategies, such as the Hampshire County Council Corporate Tree Strategy, which we're working with our colleagues in ETE on. It will be part of a local nature recovery strategy, which the Environment Bill is introducing for all parts of England to take part in, that every single part of England will have a local nature recovery strategy. That is not, it's not been determined exactly who's going to be responsible for that, but it looks like outside of the protected landscape, so outside of the national parks, that will be a county council role. And if it's not us as leadership, certainly we'll be involved in that. There are strategies that we may want to implement for different parts of the department, but the principles may be similar. So looking at our cutting regimes across all the land that we manage, and changing that or adapting that to better deliver for climate change. And we're also having some discussions with Natural England around some of the adaptive land management. So a lot of our land is protected. 60% of the land that the Countryside Service manages is protected, is designated, either for its wildlife and conservation value or for its heritage value. There are criteria that we need to meet in order to get funding to manage that land. And we are having discussions because some of that criteria is now outdated. Climate change is already affecting the way that we can deliver some of that and meet some of those criteria. So we are having some discussions around how we can be more adaptive in the way that we manage land so that we can actually meet their requirements. So that's sort of all about carbon sequestration and storage. What we are also, and I mentioned about education and influence, is looking at how we can influence what others do as well outside of the county council, and help staff and partners and the public become more aware of what we're doing, but also aware of what they can do to assist. We have a little task force that's been set up in the department that is busy beavering away, writing a sort of action plan of what we can do, how we work with our marketing colleagues to get our messages out there. And I think if you haven't seen some of the podcasts that the Countryside Service put out, we're already doing some of this. It's not new. We're already suggesting to people how they can help protect their local environment, either working with us as volunteers or how the things that they can do in their own garden or in their own local environment. And then we also have some demonstration projects that we are busy working up the briefs for. Runway's End is aiming to be an eco centre, so a sustainable centre, consuming or making sure that it's returning its own, consuming its own fire, its own smoke, as they say. So that's a sustainable eco centre that Al Palmer's leading on. We've got a frontier garden at Hilliers that's in development and will be seeking funding, which is looking at those plants on the edge of the climate and the impact of climate change on our plants. And then my team are working on a carbon positive country park using that decision making tool as a pilot, but also being able to be a shop window for our visitors to see what we're doing, not just perhaps in the countryside service, but across other parts of the department as well. It always feels like when you present these that we've all been standing still waiting for a strategy to arrive, and that isn't the case at all. In fact, you know, we have done an awful lot of work around this, and it's almost central to what we do in the countryside service. The pollinator project is an important project. We've been doing a lot of work around increasing and trying to increase in habitats for pollinators, and our latest piece of work is working with parishes to produce a toolkit that they can use to see how they can actually improve the land that they're responsible for in terms of its delivery for invertebrates and pollinating insects. We have restored an area of fen habitat. It's a small area, but it's an area that we will be looking at how that performs in terms of its ability. It's a sort of a case study, really. And then the farm carbon toolkit. All tenant farms have been asked to calculate their carbon footprint, so that's being led by the county farms team. And that's really interesting. That's not just about what the land does, but it's also about their operations, what machinery they use, and taking all aspects, if you like, of emissions as well as their sequestration work. And then, of course, our woodland action plan, which is building on our ash dieback work, looking at our mitigation for ash removal, and that will be things like the tree planting, natural regeneration, but also ash retention zones as well. So where we can retain and don't need to remove, can we do that safely? I just realised that the date's quite a little bit wrong at the end here, but I just put the key milestones up so you can see that that we've planned that work in. It should say March 2022, not 21. But you can see that we are working on that. Hopefully we'll be able to come back at a later date with some more information about some of those pilot projects if you are interested. And we are also working on this sort of larger landscape scale case study, which we hope, based on some of the information you've seen today, that we hope will help us in our future strategy for climate change and carbon sequestration and storage. That's me. Thank you.
I think you're on mute, Chairman.
I thought I'd had it. Yeah, I just want to say thank you. I'm on mute now, aren't I?
Yes.
One or two things, because most of the county council doesn't own a majority of the land in the county.
No.
And do you have, you've talked about education and things, but do you offer advice to farmers? I mean, if, say, you brought up fen land, and if a landowner had a chunk of fen land, if we got onto you and said, can you help us maximise this, do you offer this service or not?
No, we're not in that way, but there are a lot of farm clusters now around the county, and we are part of those farm clusters. So there is an ability for us to work with them. What that means is we're trying to actually look at more of a landscape scale approach to the way that we manage in Hampshire, and that will involve private landowners as well as public landowners like ourselves. So it's more through influence and demonstration than direct advice. We are going to be sharing some of this learning though with people like Hampshire Wildlife Trust, who are very interested, and of course are doing a lot of work themselves. We're members of the Local Nature Partnership, and again we'll be sharing this with members, which includes the CLA and NFU, So I think it's mainly through, if you like, rather than direct advice.
So it's influence rather
than influence, education, influence. And to be fair, there will be other drivers for farmers to need to respond to this anyway, because the new system coming in, the agro-environment system coming in, will be requiring more of public goods for public money, which will be this stuff that we're talking about, all of this in terms of, hedgerow management, wetland management, woodlands, etc. So there is quite other drivers, financial as well as climatic,
coming in.
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing, sometimes it's rather confusing, but verges, what happens to them? With a rural division, it sometimes can be quite an issue. You get people complaining because they've been cut, and then people complaining because they haven't been cut.
Yes, and we will be working with highways a bit more on there, because I know they've been reducing their cutting where they can, and I know they've been influenced, I think, by local communities in terms of what they would like to see, and that's something we would like to pick up. I think we're focusing at the moment on CCBS, but verge management it links to that operations, doesn't it? In terms of can we safely leave areas longer without cutting, and as part of that, is there some reduction perhaps in cost of management as well?
Good. Okay, we've got quite a lot of hands up here. Councillor Hare.
Oh, thank you. I thought I was last, but
I'm sorry, I didn't notice when they all went up, so I'm just taking them as I see them.
Okay. Shall I do my question first then?
Yes, do.
Thank you, Jo. That was really lovely. I really like your presentations. I feel that we're already almost there, looking at the and we present them really well. Just one question is, what percentage of our buildings in the country farms have solar panels? And the other one is, are you encouraging, I don't know how the county farms work, but are you encouraging county farms to produce organic foods at all?
So, first question, we don't have any solar panels as such in our country parks, partly because most of our buildings are heritage buildings in the parks, and so it's all retrofit, which is not necessarily, well, a lot of the time we couldn't get that because the listed status of those buildings anyway. We are looking at whether there are other ways that solar might play a role, maybe in terms of solar fields rather than solar on buildings, which is a slightly different approach. And that's part of that, looking at the carbon positive park, is an analysis of whether that's something we could be doing and what the impact of that would be. With regards to the farms, we are working, and perhaps the other people better qualified to answer this, but we're working with county farms in terms of what more county farms could be doing to deliver against some of the things I've been talking about today, and we'll be setting that out by working with tenants, particularly new tenants as they come in, around how they respond to the new agri-environment drivers, how they respond to things like the local nature recovery strategy, and how they deliver their operations to minimise the impact on the environment as well. So I think organic farming is a specific thing, but actually there's more that we can do in the round, so more hedgerows or similar, that will make a difference. It's up to the tenant to a degree what they come back with. What we're setting out is our ambition for those particular holdings and what they can deliver.
Thank you.
And now, just next in line, I got Councillor Makata. I'm sorry if I'm doing this in the wrong order.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, Joe. That was fascinating. I've got a number of questions. I'll try and be quite brief about them. The first one is the same question that the Chairman asked. I'm going to ask in a slightly different way about the parish pollinator project. It's always I also have a very rural division for a large chunk of it. There's a huge tension between safety of motorists with verges being cut back and the desire of making more wildlife friendly. And to my mind, it's a PR issue, and it's about how we overcome that safety issue as we try and argue there are other benefits that actually make it less safe. And I'm really interested how you work with ETE on that issue as we try and encourage farmers to let hedges grow out and encourage them to let verges grow out. The second question I've got is separate to that. Is you talked about maximising benefits. I'm really interested how we quantify those benefits and whether we're looking at it in purely economic terms or whether we're using some of Dieter Helm's natural capital ideas, in which case some of our farmland, some of our county-owned farms on marginal farmland are not economic, and about whether we're prepared to go down the route of saying actually some of this land is better off not being farmed than being farmed if we looked at it in a slightly different way. I accept it's a complicated equation, but I'm really interested to know, as we talk about maximising benefits, what are we looking at, and are we prepared to be a little bit more radical? And as you say, we have a huge amount of protected landscape in Hampshire that we are involved in. Are we prepared to go further than perhaps we have in the past? Thank you.
Thank you. I think your question around quantification is one that the industry struggles with, actually, in terms of measuring biodiversity improvement. It's why we're challenging some of the criteria, if you like, from the past, because understanding whether a triple SI is in good condition, how you determine that in the light of the pressures that we have, recreation or like I say, climate changes, or even just species and habitat changes that are happening more naturally. There is that debate, and I think there is still the debate about for example, the biodiversity net gain, the 10%. How do you determine that? Is it just about land area, or is it about the delivery on that land and the extent to which we're able to make a difference? You know, the gap, if you like. The issue that we have in countryside often is the gap is quite small. We're already doing a really good job. We're looking after and protecting nature and wildlife. There are other areas, as you say, farmland, that may deliver more. But I think we do get into conversations around, should it be either or? And I don't think it needs to be either or. It can be both. There's just more that we can do. The gap is bigger where we're farming than potentially where we've already got nature reserves, for example. And that will all come through, I think, with the Agricultural Act and the Environment Bill working together. We'll make those changes. And we, as a county council, I guess, need to be in a leadership position around how we respond to that. So we are working, and Councillor Heron, who's here, is sitting on an ELM convener, which is looking at the environmental land management and how the process of that, how do we set those objectives for what the land delivers for nature, for public goods, for those benefits to the natural environment that we've been talking about. And that's all coming. So I think we're in a good place and a good space to do that, and we need to demonstrate, and we will be demonstrating some of that leadership, and certainly through the changes that we're making in the way that county farms are leased will be part of that. I hope that answers your questions.
Do you want to tackle my safety question about verges?
Yes. Well, yes, I think it's not a one size fits all. I think that's the problem, isn't it? And we haven't been working that closely with ETU through this at the moment, but it is our next step, and I know that they have been making strides. I don't know if anybody else, whether Felicity knows more around the work that ETU have been doing on verges, but we are intending to work with them more on how that's interpreted and how we work with local communities to make that happen.
Thank you. Of course, if the verges are left long, people might drive slower, which would reduce carbon anyway. But that might be a long way around. Councillor Benison.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Joe. I sat there listening to your presentation, thinking this is a huge, huge piece of work. There is massive change coming to the farming industry in the next few years, with all the subsidies being phased out, 4 years and then finally 7 years. My first question really is, where is this driver coming from that you're putting together here? You've mentioned the Environment Bill. This is a bill going through Parliament, presumably, which is going to change everything. And we're following that. We're looking at that, and we're trying to put things in place. I have one question, really. You mentioned about a carbon positive country park. Would you like to expand a little bit on that? I mean, are we going to go to the fact that, okay, we can find out how much carbon we've got locked in. We can do as much as we can with the woodland and all the rest of it. But are we then, and the input that probably comes in with the food that we bring in and the waste that we create from that, but then are we going to go one step further and look at how people come to that park? Are they going to travel by car there, which is not very good, but if they cycle there or they walk there, which is fantastic. How is that going to work? Thank you.
That's a good question. Well, it's all those things. So yes, you're right. We need to tackle all parts of the park, and I think part of the reason for doing it is around that showcase, is around that having those conversations with people around about the climate and natural environment as well. So that's the reason we do it, in the sense that part of it will be, I think you'll probably find that we're pretty good as it is, because it's we're looking at River Hamble Country Park for this at the moment. We're probably delivering quite a lot of positive stuff already, but it's about the judgment we make around the difference, because that's one of our only sites we've got that has already got some farmland on it. So we can demonstrate to our visitors and partners the difference that it can make by changing land use or changing the way we operate. But you're right, we need to tackle all the areas, such as the food that's on the menu and the waste, joining with those other work streams that I talked about at the beginning. The travel one is also one that we need to look at, and perhaps understanding how far people are travelling and what that emission is part of the communication that we have with people. It's always really tricky, because we want people to come by. We want people to come in a sustainable fashion, obviously for the environment, but we also want them to spend their money, and car parking is our major, so to be brutally honest, is our major income source. But we need to be doing the right thing. So at the moment, we haven't gone that far. So that brief has not been written, but that was very useful. I think we will need to at least understand what the impact of those people coming in their cars are. Of course, we've got things like electric charging points. So talking to people about their electric cars, all of our parks now have electric charging points. That's something that we've changed. And although we haven't got solar, I know it's asked earlier, we are replacing our lighting with LED, for example. There's other energy efficiency measures that we're putting in place. And there's all part of the same conversation, the part of that showcase of what Hampshire County Council is doing across the whole piece, and using the park as an illustration of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
And I got Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, Joe, Councillor Venison's really taken my question, because we use QE quite a lot. And so when you put down recreation and air quality, we've given up going there. It's been a fantastic success. It's been lovely seeing all the families out, people on their bikes. But we've been there twice, and we've tried all the car parks and had to drive out again. And the parks are slightly being damaged by their success, because with the mud, we're losing all the verges, the paths are getting wider. So a bit like Councillor Benison, I had wondered how, with the air quality and the trees, had you taken that into consideration? And also in the parks, you go on about food management and waste. And I did bring it up when I was there, because of the safety you have to take on food because of COVID, there's a lot of plastic and some of it is recyclable, but it all goes into one bin. And I do think if all our parks are like that, we need to do something about it. And then my other question to you, with ash dieback, Wakehurst is now able to produce ash trees that are going to be resistant. Have you found out anything about that? And if we can later on, I know it'll be years to come, replace them with ash, because it is an important tree. Sorry for that, Joe.
No, that's thank you, Councillor Briggs. No, it's really helpful. You're right about the waste management. That is an area that we know we need to improve. That's around the procurement of the waste services. Ash dieback, we are aware that there are some showing some resistant strains. That's why we want some ash retention zones to try and see if we can hold on to any ash that are showing signs of being resilient to the disease, and use those for natural regen. But we are working with others such as the Woodland Trust and the Forestry Commission over the future, what we plant in the future as well, because it's not just about what we plant in the future that helps mitigate the loss of the ash and the associated species with ash, but it's also about what's more climate resilient as well. So we're looking at our restocking and how that would work, working with those sort of on the leading edge, really, if you like, of some of the organisations involved.
Okay, thank you. Chairman, may I ask just one more question? Yes. I'm also on Chichester Harbour Conservancy, which Hampshire pays half of the precept to. We're trying to do the same sort of thing there. Have you ever thought to talk to other authorities or other parks, other things about how they're managing it? Because at the harbour, we're very well aware that we're going to lose a lot of it later because of rising water. I just wondered if it would be helpful to liaise with someone like Chichester Harbour. Because it's not just a harbour, it is a large conservancy.
That's right, and we do work with them. We do work with them. My officers do work with the officers at Chichester Harbour, looking at their same issues, and we do share. There's quite a lot of cross working that goes on in sharing knowledge and understanding about the future.
Yeah, thank you, Jo.
But thank you.
Thank you, Jo. Now I've got Councillor Hiscock.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Joe, I've got just a couple of quick questions. I'm sorry if I'm easy. One of them is that we've got 2 national parks represented in Hampshire, and they deal with other authorities, particularly the South Downs National Park deals with a lot of other counties. I was wondering whether or not they provide much of a forum or have a role to play in organising something joint between the different authorities in the south of England to try and make sure that we're working together. That's the first question. The second question is, are some crops better to grow than others in terms of carbon reduction? Simple, really.
Yes. Well, the second one first, yes, but don't ask me what they are.
That'd be something where
there are nitrogen fixing crops that help with. So it depends a bit on also that spider diagram, exactly what you're looking at. If you're looking at loss of nitrogen or if you're looking at carbon sequestration, it depends a little bit on what. But cropping, obviously, the whole point of cropping is you take it out and replace it. So that in itself, there's an issue with that. South Downs National Park Authority and the New Forest National Park Authority, we do work closely with, but and they are, like you say, very useful in sharing what's happening in other authorities with us. And we will be working more closely with them when it comes to things like the local nature recovery strategy. We've already had some pre-meetings with them around what their approach is going to be and what our approach is going to be. And I think, South Downs particularly has made a really good head start on some of that, and they're very active around the farm clusters and the future of the agriculture as well in the authority. So yes, we do work, but I quite like your idea of perhaps more of a joint forum bringing other local authorities together to see what the different approaches are is useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I've now got Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, thank you, Joe, for an excellent presentation. That really was very interesting. It's an enormous project, which is going to take years and years to come to fruition. And one hopes that technology and innovation in the meantime will produce other ideas which are going to make a big difference, because we're talking about electric vehicles, but they've suddenly become controversial as to whether they provide the overall benefit, because the batteries all have to come from China, and the question is over this mining of these precious metals that are needed in the batteries, and they're only found in China. So that is an issue for the future, and one hopes that ideas and innovation is going to change the way these batteries are produced. But my question, I understand entirely that this relates to farms and parks across the county. But we've got loads and loads of properties, and some of them in the urban areas where people, landowners have got perhaps, I don't know, just a few acres of land attached to their properties. Overall, it would make a big difference if all those properties were taking part in some way. So is there a proposal to go out to the residents to offer them the pollinator project or the overall ideas that you've got? Are you going to engage directly with the public in some way to invite them to take part?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Carter. We have the education and engagement piece of work that task force is doing is really partly about that, and we have increased our number of newsletters. So people that sent our mailing list for our newsletter for the Countryside Service has increased over the last year, actually since lockdown, by 4,000. So we're now up to 10,000 households essentially that receive our mailing, which we do feature obviously all the things that they can do, from little videos on hedgehog homes to how to encourage insects in their gardens or in their whatever they own. So we already do some of that, but that's the point of that education and information and engagement task force, is what more can we do to engage with the public to help them do, and our residents to help them do the right thing. So it is part of what we're doing. Are you talking about sort of our estate, or are you talking about residents as a whole?
Well, residents as a whole. And I think there is a real opportunity there. I mean, how are we engaging with the schools particularly? Because young children will really want to engage with this project going forward. I mean, they are the future. So, I mean, if you're engaging, well, I hope you are engaging with our schools in some shape or form. And then from the children, it can obviously go back to their parents, some of whom will have a significant amount of land attached to their properties. So, they can all take part, which overall would make a significant difference, I would think.
Can I just come in to supplement that, Chair? Yes. I think that's showing the interrelatedness of what Joe's been talking about here with other county council initiatives and other Hampshire initiatives, because Hampshire 2050 will be picking up a lot of the what I'd call community carbon savings and initiatives. And I think a lot of what you're talking about there in terms of education and the action of the individual citizen is going to sit within the Hampshire 2050 initiative and be driven forward there. So, I mean, without asking Joe to sort of solve the world's problems, I think we're asking Joe to focus more on the Hampshire estate in terms of her role, and 2050 will be picking up the wider community and individual citizen responsibility.
Well, yes, thank you for that. And it is something for the future. But one could also, this COVID situation that we're in at the moment, the general public have got to take responsibility. And the problems we have is that a lot of them are not. But the issues we're discussing now, it will make a difference if the public are really engaged with it. Anyway, that is something for the future. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Felicity, too, for coming in there. Now I've got Councillor Branson.
Thank you, Chairman. I just would like to reiterate what Councillor Briggs said about there's no recycling bins in the country parks. Certainly in Staunton Park, you know, the new Regency Cafe is doing a fantastic job of not giving out plastic, and yet there is no recycling for it. So I think that is something that is certainly something that my son, who uses it a lot, commented on. But I was really going to ask about nitrate mitigation. How much is that affecting this? And certainly it's something that the coastal communities have been very concerned about, and I'm just wondering how much that is an issue here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, nitrate mitigation is an issue for the South Hampshire, and there is an ability. Well, you can see from that illustration that actually we can sort of see the impact of changing some of the land management can have on in terms of nitrate loss. We are working with Natural England and our other partner organisations to look at the nitrate mitigation strategy for South Hampshire and the role that we play in that, because actually, as I mentioned, in terms of the countryside service, there's a limited role we can play because we're already doing a lot of the right things on our own land. So there isn't much in terms of that offsetting the impact of nitrates. But we are working with Hampshire Wildlife Trust, who are doing actually purchasing land more proactively to help with the nitrate mitigation issue and helping with the offsetting. And actually they are able to do that within easier, if you like, in many ways than we are as a local authority. So it has an impact because there are things that we can do, and we are having some discussions around what that actually is, particularly for the farm estate as well as ourselves. But it's more of a collective strategy that's required across the whole of South Hampshire, and we're just part of that. So does that help?
Does that help?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Oh, Councillor McCatter again.
Yeah, can I follow that up, Joe? You just said
Yes,
something
sir.
very interesting about working with the Wildlife Trust. Can I ask you what our view is on working with Wildlife Trusts, which typically have management plans for the areas that they're looking after, rather than leaving them to be slightly more natural or wilder without a management plan? Are we planning on actually letting some of our land go into an area that is unmanaged rather than managed, as quite a lot of the natural campaigners would argue that we should be doing?
So Hampshire Wildlife Trust have got a campaign 30% wilder. There's a question about what does that actually mean. If you're talking about natural regeneration, because when we're talking about rewilding, often that actually means natural regeneration. So in other words, you don't manage, you don't cut down, scrub like we do, you don't necessarily plant anything, you allow the natural systems to return. That in itself is a management decision. So it's still a part of a management plan to say this field or these areas will be left for natural regeneration. There's a question around whether there's recreation in those areas or not. There's a question around interpretation and information you're providing about what you're trying to do and why. So I still think as part of a management plan, it's just around deciding where you can do that. We have limited places for that, but that's part of what we would be looking at that carbon positive park would be, do we allow natural regen to take its course and rewild, if you like, those areas. I have to remind everybody that there is no such thing as wild environment left in England, maybe small parts of Scotland. Everything we have pretty much has been managed at one time or another. So, but if we're talking about sort of natural systems and allowing natural systems rather than interfering quite as much as we do, that is something that we would like to have some projects, and we're working with our partners in their local nature partnership to see where in Hampshire that would be most appropriate to have something on a bigger scale than just, you know, the sort of small areas that perhaps potentially we're responsible for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. There's actually, I mean, there's the famous Wilding book, which actually, the whole point of it is that the land's not much use for anything else, which slightly is good for. Anyhow, thank you very much. That's really interesting, and I think we've all learnt a lot. I certainly have. And that the recommendation we don't have is just to note the presentation. Are we all agreed on that? Noting the presentation. Okay. So the next on the agenda is the work programme. And today we've done the budget proposals and the environment work stream. Next time we're going to be looking at, I've got a mark against the registration service, which should be very interesting because that's a relatively new part of our of the CCB, I mean, of the work we have to do. We are due for another update in, I think, September. The next three things on the work programme we last heard about in September. Does anyone want to add something or suggest that we should look and see? Because the next meeting, I think, is April, isn't it?
Do you think we need a COVID report?
I think that would be quite a good idea, just to see whether it could be late enough, because I think we're still going to be very much in it. Councillor Chegwin.
Oh, I've got my, okay.
Oh, you want, oh no, Councillor Hiscock. I got you both.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like, before the meeting, members were discussing something which I think we're all aware of, which is the condition of some of our country footpaths. And I was wondering whether or not we shouldn't be looking at how we can support parishes and landowners and other organisations with, if nothing else, but advice or perhaps something a bit more helpful to what we can do to make sure the footpath conditions don't continue to deteriorate in the way that they are, because I hope that a lot of people are now getting used to taking regular exercise and they will continue to do so, and that this is going to continue to put pressure on our footpaths. That's whether or not we should be looking at that. I hate to have to put more on Joe or her team, but I don't know how else we're going to do this.
Felicity, did you want to come in on that?
I would welcome being able to work through what we're doing on that with the committee. It clearly has been one hell of a year for that. I managed to land hands and knees in a particularly nasty, muddy puddle the other day, so I'm well aware. We do quite a bit of work with the parishes. We do fund the parishes. They all have adopted footpaths that they maintain, and the task is never done. But I think we've just put some capital funding into some of the major bridge repairs and things that are needed. So we're very much aware of the ongoing maintenance burden. But yeah, very happy to bring a report. I think that's absolutely fine to come. Perhaps we look at whether it comes to March or the next one, if I can just have a word with Joe about timelines on that. But we definitely can put that into the work programme.
Thank you.
I think it's a very good
Can
idea.
that include footpaths in the country parks as well?
Well, I think it can include the state of the country parks, if you like. I mean, there is the, I'm afraid there is the inevitable annual mud issue. So we can ask Joe to distinguish between what's annual mud and what might be additional usage that is causing additional problems this year.
Thank you.
Well, I know if I mean things like boats, we do sometimes close them to motorcycles and four-wheel drive over the winter, and I think that's very positive. Councillor Chegwin.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd echo the request for a report on footpaths and also for one on COVID, even if we're not through COVID by the next meeting. I note there is a report going on footpaths to the executive member this afternoon, as indeed there is a report on grants, and it's perhaps a pity that neither...
I've lost you.
Sorry, I'm having a problem with the controls. It's a pity perhaps that neither of those reports that are going to the executive member this afternoon came here this morning. Perhaps at future meetings, noting that 6 of the last 12 meetings of this committee have been cancelled. We can't blame COVID for all of those. Perhaps we could always check what reports are going to the executive member and ensure we do have a chance to comment on them first, rather than, as I say, 2 of the 3 reports he's got this afternoon have not come here. Would have been useful perhaps if we'd had a chance to comment on, for instance, the grant cuts to the Spring Arts Centre that are being proposed this afternoon, and the massive grant cut to Energise Me, formerly Sport Hampshire. If this committee is to have any role, we should have had a chance to comment on those before the executive member.
Thank you.
Can I just
recently had a report on Energise Me, haven't we? Didn't we?
Can I just comment on those 2 grants? There has been an opportunity for the select committee to comment on those, because those are part of the 3-year reduction in funding. So that discussion has been had, and that is just an ongoing and the final year, in fact, of the enactment of a policy that came in 2 or 3 years ago.
We haven't had a chance to comment on the specific report this afternoon.
No, but those are just that is an ongoing tail end of something that was enacted as a policy 2 years ago.
Right. So we've had the footpaths, which and the state of footpaths and country parks. But you feel that the March meeting is a bit soon.
Joe's in the meeting still. Joe, are you happy to bring something to March, or would you prefer to sort of wait to the end of winter?
We discussed potentially bringing something on the country parks in March anyway, which was more of a sort of roundup of all the transformation works and where we've got to, because it's now a good time to perhaps bring that. And this select committee has had a watching brief over that work, I think, for the last 5 years. So it would be good perhaps to bring that as a final, almost a final report on the transformation, at least in March, which would mean that perhaps rights of way would be better in April. But I'm sort of easy either way. I think it would give us a bit more time perhaps for April.
Right, so
we don't have a meeting in April. We've got March, and then we've got March. September.
Oh, sorry.
It's March and then July at the moment.
Oh,
but
okay.
Of course,
yeah. So let's do. Should we put the country parks, the transformation of the country parks, getting muddled about this, on the programme for next time?
I'm happy to swap them round if you'd rather. If it makes sense to do so, I'm happy to swap them around and do March rights of way, July the parks. That's fine. That's fine.
Okay. All right. So we're happy just to have the one. We've got the registration service, haven't we? So which do you think? Which would be better?
Well, I would suggest both. because that gives a more meaty meeting. And I just need to check progress, but we will also have the County Farms policy coming to executive member for decision around that time, I think in March, and that would be another one that I think you'd want to pick up from the executive members decision day.
Right. So we're agreed that we're going to add the county council country parks and the footpaths.
Yes.
For next time.
And then I will just check with Emma anything that's coming to decision day that it would be sensible for the select committee to scrutinise at the same time.
Exactly.
In line
we've
with...
still got, we're not bringing up the cultural trust or the library service.
I don't think we'll need
those. We'll leave them on the agenda, but we won't put the cross in March.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we've completed everything. Has anyone got anything that they want to say? They haven't. But thank you very much, everybody. Oh, Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to ask Jo, because she'd be able to answer my question, please. I know we don't allow hunting on our land, but do we allow trail riding? I've had this from somebody who's in my area.
Can I come in on that one rather than Jo, Councillor Briggs? There is a stand. We have had a large number of standard letters around this.